Um, let's get started. My name is Simeon Wong. So here's the land acknowledgement slide as well. Um, my topic today is the future of work. It takes a village, and the uh, the the main premise of this presentation is that the role of educators and caregivers is shifting quite a bit from in the past to what's going to be like in the future. And, whereas in the past there were very clear, kind of distinct roles and vocations, etc. Growing up for me, it was really quite simple. You were either a lawyer, a doctor, engineer, or whatever that was. It was a pretty clear path going forward. But because of technology and everything else in the future, work is going to look very different for our students and for our children as well. And the roles of educators and caregivers are going to change quite a bit. So, quick introduction. So, I'm Simeon Wong. I'm an executive coach and career strategist. I'm the founder of this company that you can see there, and I'm a former Bay Street executive for about 20 years. I also gave a TEDx on careers, etc. as well. So, what does an executive career coach do? So, I work with senior leaders in government and corporate world to essentially help them develop their career and kind of career management, career betterment. And in some cases, it's a matter of coaching, developing a job search strategy or writing documents that are executive resumes, and helping them with their job search essentially. But in large part, it's kind of working with these leaders to kind of be a bit of a guidance counselor for them. They may have been like executives in a company for a while, and all right, got it. Okay, no problem. Okay, so that's a little bit about me. So how many of you have heard, of the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And I'm sure all of us have been asked that question at some point or another. 30 years ago, that was very different. And, may have been followed up with, again, very distinct kind of roles where they're very clear. You know your place in society, and kind of, the idea behind that was everyone needed to find their place, their role in community. What's their contribution to the world? That was clear, and how to get there was quite clear as well. You had to kind of go to school, maybe get a college degree or university degree or certificate, and then you kind of went through the ranks of training, and then you kind of had your work. Today it's very different, right? So guidance counselors have an unenviable job of trying to navigate through all the different options that there are out there, and even in many cases, guidance counselors don't really know what exactly are the skills that are needed to succeed. Now, in the future, can you imagine with the introduction of AI and technology, how that's going to further change, right? Where there's a lot more guidance that's needed for students and from caregivers and educators around, well, how do you maintain transferable skills? How do you maintain relevant in an economy where things are shifting really quickly? So roles and job descriptions are increasingly blurring. A lot of the roles that are being done, as you may know, there probably isn't even a job description for it because they're either vague or they're just very collaborative, right? They're not clear. There are still obviously lawyers and doctors, engineers, but at the same time, even what that means is changing because as a medical doctor, for example, people with access to the internet can get a lot of information about their issues before seeing the doctor. So jobs that graduates will take on have yet to be created. So even as we speak now, jobs are and roles are being defined better in better sense, and kind of people are figuring out what part of the puzzle do they fit into as far as bringing their skill sets. And so going forward, it really will take a village to equip and empower the new workforce. So the nature of work in the past was like this, right? There's a couple of attributes, I guess you could attach to that. One is the structure and stability, right? And so work was predictable roles, titles, predictable schedule, location, hierarchical structures, meaning that you had a boss, you had a team, you had people that you were leading. It was very clear where you sat in the kind of the big picture. And there were clear lines of authority and communication, right? And by the way, I don't know if there's an option for participation, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll try to address them as well. And then job longevity. So there was a real emphasis on loyalty, right? Longer term tenures at a job. You might stay there at a company for many years and make a good career out of it, right? And when promotions and rewards were tied to tenure and loyalty. So you're kind of like if you were loyal to the company and you stayed there, kind of went up the ranks, then you would get rewarded by compensation, by job titles, etc. So that was kind of in the past. Now, in the past, also things were manual, repetitive, and I'm sure that m many of you have gone through jobs where things that you were supposed to do were very they're very kind of boring, right? And manual, repetitive, and many roles kind of focused on routine and manual tasks. And this was because essentially to run the machine in the past, it was relatively kind of, we need five people on the team with these different skills. But the problem is that in many cases, no one's taking care of like the administrative parts of it, or maybe even more of the. It might be very technical, but at the same time, it's very repetitive. So, if somehow things could be automated, that would be really good. But back then, I'd say 30 years back, because that's when I sort of started in the workforce. Communication collaboration in the past, meetings and memos, limited reliance on digital tools, and then skill requirements, typically formal education, specific technical skills prioritized. I think of accounting that you needed to have, a CA or CPA. You needed to kind of show that you'd have a number of hours of accounting experience. And that's what it was. It was just very clear. And if you didn't have that, then you wouldn't get the job, right? So very clear cut, kind of a bit of a cookie cutter view of the world. Now, in that world, the role of parents and caregivers was they were tradition keepers. They essentially encouraged career paths that mirrored their own, right? So they would say, or in some cases were different. They would say, "Well, I didn't have an opportunity to do such and such going forward. Take this opportunity. You can kind of like craft out your own career." But in some cases, they were like, "Well, I've had a really great job, a great run at things. I've been loyal to my company. Here's what I think that you should do," right? But they were keeping tradition and they were aligned with stable, socially respected professions. And they focused a lot on stability. So I don't know if you remember, your parents or caregivers, they were always saying, make sure that you don't have to rely on anybody for your paycheck, right? Make sure that you are able to hold your own and be able to support yourself and your family. Well, they guided children towards like a longer kind of secure term with clear trajectories, clear goals, right? And promotion, etc. And they value financial stability, job permanence over passion, exploration, and all that. Part of that mentality was, I think, as a lot of like North Americans, we see experience a lot of immigration. So new immigrants coming into Canada or US, they would sort of say, well, I came without really a lot of possessions or valuables. I didn't have a lot of education, so I had to kind of do manual labor. So now you have an opportunity to go to, post secondary or whatever that is. You should find something that's like stable, right? And can provide for you financially and is you don't run the risk of losing that job. Don't follow kind of how you feel or how you what you like. That's not going to get you any money, right? And they also are served as sort of they operate unlimited information, right? Quite frankly, there was no internet at all. So what they kind of relied on were their friends and family and people who told them that, this was a great path to go down. And the career advice was based on personal experience and, conventional kind of common sense wisdom. And obviously they didn't have, this whole view of like the internet kind of shows you what the world does, what sort of, different companies do. So they couldn't support their children that way, in that sense. And they also kind of support it within boundaries, right? So they often supported education within a narrow framework. So, how many times have you said to your, parent giver, caregiver, or have you heard, I want to be an art educator, or I want to be an artist or musician, or I want to be a something that's not conventional, and they would say, no, no, you don't do that, right? You have to do what little Jimmy does, which is engineering science, whatever it is. That's the boundary. You've got to stay within this boundaries. It's a game that you have to play. And then they're focused on known fields in traditional higher education as a default, right? My point really here is that the emphasis on kind of creativity, innovation, exploration was very, very minimal. And we kind of experienced that as well. I'm pretty sure. And pastoral of educators in this case, they were knowledge providers, right? So think about your guidance counselors, the teachers that kind of engage in your life. They provided you what they knew, right? And so they were source of information. They're not necessarily guidance per se, because um, I mean, I think to them it's probably very clear cut, right? So if if you bring them like a report card and you say, write me a reference letter, they'd ask you, what do you want to study? And you tell them that, and they say, well, this particular company or university college is very known for that. You should go there, right? But it's very much imparting very specific subject specific knowledge. And guidance counselors themselves generally had not probably worked outside of the education system in some cases. And so what they really could provide was what they could read, right? And what they could read is very limited because their resources were not available to them as they are today. And career stewards. So traditional paths, again, they steered towards students towards predefined roles and industries. And so they were stewards of introducing them to a particular vertical. So if this person demonstrated a lot of competency in math, for instance, right, then it would make sense to go down this very structured, labeled program called engineering, right, or finance, right? That's another big one there. And educators, they were also, skill standardization was very, very important. So the emphasis was on teaching standardized skills and competencies that were aligned for the industry or office-based work in some cases. And that's what people thought, and maybe rightly so, would make them competent and competitive, because everyone has to know these skills. And so you've got to develop them, otherwise you can't keep up. So they're kind of rules that you have to follow, right? It's like a social game there. And then linear pathways, the career advice typically was very much well, you want to do this, try this program, right? Even something like environmental science was not as popular 30 years ago that it is now. But they would say environmental science, well, UBC has a very good program, so you should sign up for that and X, Y, and Z. So, it was like, go to college, get an entry level job, and then gradually promote. That's kind of the way to do it, right? And then you'll be well off, you'll be happy doing that. But that's kind of the past role of educators. Um, any questions so far or thoughts? Any agreements, any experiences? Love to hear from you. So, I think in short, sort of, where it really fell short in a sense was the lack of information from educators to know how to steer people towards following their personal interest and passion. How do you integrate that sense of I want to be creative, right? So an entrepreneur was obviously I would say entrepreneurialism was a lot more looked up on, because if you left the kind of corporate world and you started your own thing, people saw that as tremendously valuable, and you must be extremely smart. And so it's, that educators kind of knew what they knew and they did what they did. Um, all right. So now the nature of work in the future. So as an executive coach, even working with senior level people, oftentimes I will ask them, what do you want to do next? What's your career goal and trajectory? Where do you want to make the most impact? That's a very strange question, right? If you think about asking that question 30 years ago, let's say, well, what impact do you want to have? What's your career goal, kind of a thing? It's very difficult to define that because, well, what do you mean? I've got these sets of tools and I can only make so many different kinds of ice cream, right? So that's going to be this one or that. But now, because there's so many subtleties, when you run an organization, there's everything from the traditional ones like finance and accounting, but then there's supply chain, or there's like digital marketing, there's different kinds of marketing. And so you have that flexibility of, what is it that you want to um, show off more of your skill sets, right? That you love doing and you have capacity for. So flexible hybrid models, I think that's obviously obvious one. If anyone works in an environment where you've got an option for hybrid working from home in person, but the flexibility is going to be just ginormous, right? Increasingly revolve around flexible schedules, remote environments, and the focus is going to be more on outcomes rather than hours logged, right? So company at the end of the day doesn't really care, shouldn't really care how many hours you work in the company as long as you produce what you said you're going to, right? And that makes sense. But in 30 years ago, it was really about FaceTime. It was about like showing up at the office, kind of like, being visible to work. But if you think about going in future, what does that imply for a student, for example, right? Are they going to bake into their request and requirement that I need some hybrid model and flexibility? Well, someone might say, well, that's very demanding. You're just coming out and cutting your teeth. Like, why should you have the luxury of flexibility? But the reality is that that's where companies are going anyway. So that's going to become the new norm, where you can really see that happening. And today companies that are in the news, where they're kind of forcing their employees back into the office, they're frowned upon, right? They're not. It's not something that is a an incentive for people to do. And then the work of future is, freaking career changes. I don't know how many gig economies you've had, but even in the past 30 years, as like, the economy sometimes has not been as good, gig economies are very important. And in some cases too, you only get as much growth in a company maybe over a couple of years, and then you have to change, right, to kind of get a promotion or get more skills. But this portfolio career kind of replaces the job for life model. Like we talked about earlier on about how work in the past was all about loyalty, long-term kind of career. I know some people, I used to work at Rogers Communications, and I know some old colleagues who have been there for like 40 years. And I just cannot imagine what it's like to work anywhere for 40 years, right? So, and then professionals keep changing roles, right? Industries, projects. So one of the questions when I asked my clients is, what do you want to do going forward? A lot of times the answer is I want to switch industries. I want to switch to something that's a little bit more creative, or, people impacting, creating teams, and very different than my background. But I'm just itching for a change. Now, can you imagine telling your parents that, or your caregivers that when they came over, for example, as new immigrants, right? They only had a limited number of skill sets, right? So they stuck on something and they stuck it to it to the end. Now you're telling them that, oh, I want to, explore, right? It's a real luxury to explore work, and many economies don't have that luxury. We are set in the ways, and we kind of, run the course of our career. Oh, by the way, any other comments? Feel free to drop in the chat. Very, very happy to interactive. I just want to share my experience with you as an executive coach. So, okay, future work in the future. Technology, automation, AI, don't need to really kind of harp on this. We all kind of know that technology is taking the place of a lot of things. In some cases, it helps to augment and support what we do, but many times it's taking over repetitive tasks, right? Making it sort of very simple. It's a one-click solution. And it's going to be focusing on creativity, strategic interpersonal roles, because a lot of the automation part takes over what used to be taking my very time consuming. People like our students, our children, for ourselves, can focus on more creative and engaging kind of skill sets in interpersonal development, right? And then the third thing I just want to mention is because of the internet, because of Zoom calls, there is a lot more focus on global and digital collaboration. So I don't know where all of you are from as far as where you work, and I actually love to hear that from you guys. But even if you're working in the public sector, right, there's so much that can be learned from, let's say, the education system in Norway, right? And how you do that would not be too difficult. You connect with somebody who's over there, you connect with them, and then you find a way to be able to collaborate with them and see even what they look like through Zoom. So that's going to be the future. Can you imagine 30 years ago telling your child or whatever it is that, oh, in order for you to be successful, you have to understand the global economy. So it's not even just like the market in North America or Canada, but you have to know what's going on in Japan and all this stuff. And they'll be like, well, where do I find out that information, right? And a very legitimate question, right? But now it's going to be different. It's very easy to do that. And the lifelong learning is going to be a huge focus of that because of the fact that there's so many shifting tectonic plates that are kind of changing the landscape of what's needed for success in work, right? So continuously upskilling, reskilling will be essential, right? As technology evolves and, keeping up to speed with what's the latest and greatest, right? And especially if you want to be on the forefront of innovation, that's important there. And the adaptation to new tools, methodologies, and challenges. Obviously, if you've been working, I mean, all of, if not most of you, for maybe a little while, how many times have someone brought in a new tool, right, to the company and your department? And it's just like the resistance to change is so strong that you just don't want to, you want to learn it, you don't want to incorporate it, that you just want to do things the old way, quote unquote. But to stay in touch with kind of the market and kind of keep a job in some cases, you're going to have to adapt to new tools. So it's learning how to learn, right? And the work of future is going to be defined by that. Success is going to be, can I adapt to what's changing? Can I learn what I need to learn? And I'm willing to incorporate that into maybe my new role, right? And that's kind of scary sometimes. Now, what about a comment here? Um, That's a great question. So, what are questions we should ask our students to help them discover their first paper? So, I'll come back to that in a second. But I do want to talk about quickly about the roles of both caregivers, parents, and educators as well. And the theme of this conversation really is around collaboration, right? I'm talking about collaboration between teachers, educators, and then yourselves if you're taking care of, your kids, right? So parents caregivers, what's our job, right? What's our role going forward? It'll have to be exploration encouragers. We have to encourage our young ones, as they kind of graduate to explore, right? Don't be afraid of kind of getting stuck one place, but to some extent, until hopefully you get something stable, you need to kind of look at what's your makeup, right? What's your DNA? What drives you? And we need to encourage them to explore diverse and unconventional career paths. Now, what that means is I remember graduating from business school in 2002, and already like there were just you publish roles where you apply for it, right? So job description, you apply for the very typical kind of process. You get the job and you go into the job and it's not entirely not what it said it was going to be. And if you were to kind of, 6 months, a year in and doing the work that you're doing, if I were to ask you to write a job description for what you do to replace you if you were to leave, it's almost impossible, because how would you define roles that require you to do more reporting than you expected to, or kind of give more presentations than you expect to? And what's the outcome, right, of that particular job? It's harder, but it's unconventional, and you have to explore and adapt, right? That's going to be what we support our children to have, is that ability to adapt. And then there's emerging industries that kind of, define what those are. We have to champion adaptability. That's a really big one, because being adaptable in a situation is now becoming a very forefront skill set. I don't think I need to say this to anybody, right? We all kind of get an idea for being adaptable, being relationable, being able to work with people under change is so important now. But all the more going forward, if you think about 5 or 10 years down the road, is what exactly are you being adaptable to? That's the new question, is to what end are we using AI so that, we have adapted well, right? We know how to use that. That's why I'm saying you have to be a champion for that, because it's a lifelong skill to learn, is adaptability, right? So as career landscapes evolve, we need to help children develop adaptability and resilience and a growth mindset. So when I um, when I coach executives and I say to them, you're in an interview, don't just tell the employer how you're going to solve their problem for them, right? Because presumably you're there because you can, but already be thinking about a growth mindset where you're telling the employer, here's how I'm going to help you thrive even after I help you survive. So here's what I have to offer. And, that's unique to myself and no one else, right? So the ability of growth mindset is very important. And that's part of adaptability, because in our conversations here with other people, we have to adapt constantly with what's going on, right? It's otherwise conversations become very static and boring. And that's the same way with work, right? Static and boring is just not the flavor of the world now. People are not going to stick around if things are not developing them and growing them. So adaptability. All right. Um, Again, feel free to drop comments, questions. Love the interaction here. And then the future role, again, of our future role is facilitators of opportunity. So we have to collaborate with educators to explore different options, right? So we cannot give a curriculum syllabus over to a child or a student and say, now go off to university and pick, or college and pick something and stick with that, right? We have to explore with them based on how we understand their personality, their character, how they typically, what makes them excited, what makes them passionate, and how they are able to make a difference, right? So we need to guide children in accessing diverse resources. So in matching who they are with what they want to do, it's things like the online learning platforms, global internships, networking opportunities, really push them towards being proactive about taking control of their career, right? We can't leave it to the society or market to steer it for them. They have to do it themselves. So we have to encourage the opportunities. And then this is very important. So emotional supporters. Um, it's been 35 years, actually about 40 years since I've been a teenager. And there was no such thing as emotional support for me back then. I mean, maybe being Asian, that's kind of the way that we are, right? We're not very emotive people, but the point is that it's very, very discouraging. If you've ever been on the job market yourself, and all my clients are senior executives, they're finding themselves in transition, right? They've been laid off, or they need to change or do something different, and it's a very discouraging and time sucking, energy sucking experience to look for that next opportunity, right? Part of it has to do with like, well, has everything I've ever offered gone to waste? Like, how do I bring that over to a role, right? Something that people are going to find valuable about me. But because careers are becoming less linear and potentially more volatile, we need to really provide emotional encouragement to them. And a large part of my coaching is really kind of walking people off the ledge of like discouragement and discontentment and like bitterness and but that's what it is. To make someone successful, they have to feel that emotionally that they're being supported. Ultimately it's their life, right? And they have to kind of live with their consequences and live with how they deal with problems. But as far as we can do that is helping them to succeed that way and helping them to navigate uncertainties, failures. Our generation of students are not ones that are used to failing, right? In fact, if you don't do as good as someone else, it's great. Hey, thanks for coming to participate, right? That's the new pass. And in the past, that would have been great too, but there's also a degree of like, well, if you don't do well, you don't study, whatever it is, you're not going to find a job. And that is failing. That is absolutely failing, but it's okay because you can do better than that, right? And I think that's important too. Um, and again, just I want to pause there for 1 second. Is can you see yourself in the shoes of any of these, attributes and kind of like, do you find it more difficult to do, for example, to encourage exploration, enable them to adapt, facilitate opportunities, help them discover that, provide emotional support, right? Do you have any challenges or more difficulties or accounts that you want to give about that? A couple more points. So, future role of parents and caregivers is promoters of autonomy. So, autonomy basically means that you're self-dependent. You're able to self-contain yourself as far as, making a framework and a plan and kind of figuring out who do you want to speak with first and how to prepare yourself for interviews. But we need to foster independence, right? And informed decision making about their careers. And all the more if not for anything else, it's because the internet, right, has got lots of different, quote unquote news, right, stuff about things that are needed. But at the end of the day, not all of them are correct, and not all of them are the wisest decision. So, we're not going to always be there to help them navigate through what's truth and what's not. So we have to kind of help them to figure things out. They are going to have to figure things out that we never had to before because, sometimes you have a tyranny of choices. You got too many choices, and it's actually more, tyrannical than just having one choice, right? Or no choices at all. And then supporting self-directed exploration. We talked about that earlier as well, and then also acting as lifelong career mentor. So in the past, it would have been sort of like the job of a guidance counselor, maybe sort of like, if your student is working, that it's a performance review, right? Their manager might tell them, here's what we need you to do more of, right? To develop yourself. But we need to participate in that too. We need to help them like, extend beyond, early career guidance, and more of a mentoring kind of a role. Now we're capable of doing that now that our parents couldn't because we're kind of a generation in general. And I don't know the age of this group here, but in general, we've kind of been through the migration of what life was like before digital and after that. And so we kind of have an idea for navigating through that, what it's like. Maybe for some of us, it's more painful than others, but we can kind of help them to navigate through that and let them know that it's going to be okay. Everything will be fine. And this is not a topic about a presentation about mental health, but certainly failure, not being able to find work and kind of seeing other people find work, that really does impact, our students mentally. So we need to mentor them and help them walk them through that with life skills that we know and offer support and advice is going to be pivotal, right? Redefining their careers throughout their lives. Okay. All right. So I found this part of the presentation very interesting because, I thought back to the way that I was parented and how much of these things applied. And you know, you're not going to see my parents being lifelong career mentors. Let's put it that way, right? And autonomy for sure. Yes, go do your own thing, but it's a very different reason why they would do that. Okay. The last part I want to talk about is the future role of educators in that part of the village, right? It takes a village to raise the future talent. And I think educators have a very challenging time ahead of them. I don't envy any teachers or guidance counselors or principals, administrators, because in some sense they're straddling both worlds. They have to understand what's in the market, help students succeed, provide them with the skills that they need, but they themselves are not like always at the forefront of change. Like I don't think any of us are. We're always constantly trying to understand what the market looks like, and then we're thinking about, well, we've got like 40 kids in the room. Where are they all going to go, right? So developing skills for evolving is a very important thing. So equipping students with adaptable, transferable skills like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, digital literacy, right? I don't need to remind our group that these are all important, but for every student and every educator, it's going to be a different dynamic. My wife's a school teacher, and the kinds of personalities that she encounters are very, very different. And so, how do you help each one of them to navigate, develop transferable skills, be creative, be adaptable, right? Um, but if you notice, it's different than what I said at the very beginning of the presentation of the skills that are going to be needed, which were very rigid: finance, accounting, engineering, math, like all these things were very rigid. That's what you need, right? Um, but also the second thing is, mentors for lifelong learning. So again, talked about lifelong learning earlier as a very important skill to have. The curiosity about life is going to be so important. Curiosity doesn't just breed entrepreneurship, but it breeds like great behavior at work, right? Because if you're curious about something and you genuinely want to know the answer, it tends to enable you to do a good job, right? If quite frankly, and I think workplaces really do value that. Um, so shifting emphasis away towards fostering a mindset of continuous learning and preparing students to reskill and upskill as industries evolve. So again, if you're a teacher educator, I know your job must be extremely challenging because it's a bit of a moving target. And perhaps, I don't know, it's not necessarily teaching your students specific skills like coding, but it's teaching them to learn how to do a framework about learning. What are you looking for when you learn a new skill, right? What exactly are you looking to do better, right? Where can you see your skill applying? What markets or industries do we think that there's a need for leading teams or presenting, whatever it is? And then yeah, the lifelong piece of it, there's a theme, right? Educators and parents and caregivers, we all have to be lifelong learning people who care for our students and prepare them by being lifelong mentors, right? Okay, a couple more points here, then I'll open it up for Q&A here. The future role of educators, navigators of complexity, right? This is a huge one. So I coach probably 3 to 4 new clients every week and kind of go on for about 6 weeks to 7 weeks. But we spend a lot of time talking about complexity. Like, even in describing to me, like if I were to ask any of you, if I were interviewing you, can you walk me through your work history, right? First of all, we don't know where to start, but we'll start. We'll start somewhere. But it gets very complex very easily. There's a lot of nuances around how people behave. Bad behavior because of skill sets that aren't learned or that evolving. They thought things were done a certain way, but no, I mean the puck has gone somewhere else now. They have to skate there, right? But complexity is a huge, huge topic here. And the dynamic and often ambiguous job market does not help. So if you've ever used LinkedIn or Indeed or any one of these, you'll see very quickly that the job descriptions that come out are not always very clear. And so you're applying against a standard that just seems to be moving, and you're not really sure even what the definition of certain words are, right? So, but navigators and complexity means that we help the students identify emerging industries as well. So, what are some unconventional career paths, and opportunities to learn, side projects, right? Side project-based economy, and then builders of emotional intelligence. So nurturing emotional intelligence, collaboration, interpersonal skills. To some extent, you can't really teach these things. You're born with them, right? You're born with sort of a ability to be more emotionally kind of adept, in some sense. But in many cases, it's also how you model. Um, so educators who are able to show empathy, able to show understanding to students who are wrestling through what should be my career look like. My marks are a certain way, so I won't be able to get in certain programs that I want to. It's okay. It'll be fine, right? Just continue to understand what your strengths are and think about where do you want to make an impact and be adaptable in all these things. So understand that students need to have that support from an emotional intelligence perspective. A lot more can be said about that, but I'll just leave it at that. Two more things. So educators need to be advocates for personal branding. So you cannot sell yourself now based on the vertical of the role that you want to be. So you're going to be, you know, again, I pick on like accounting, right? You're going to be accountant. That's your brand. That's all it is. You don't need to be personal brand. What does that mean? But in this day and age, because everything is shifting, you have to teach students to build and manage their own personal brands, which might change over time, and that differentiates themselves from other people in a competitive world. I'll give you a good example. So a very typical client story will be, I have someone who started off their career as an engineer, and they were mechanical engineering. They were all this kind of work, and they kind of grew up through the ranks and became like a director or a VP. And now they're trying to pivot over because they actually want to work with people. They want to build teams of engineers as opposed to be an engineer. Now, the question is then, if someone looks at me and says, you want to do that, so what qualifications do I have, right? Why should I hire you on as a team builder? That becomes what branding is. It's like, how do I brand myself to show that I have the qualifications to do that new job, right? Teaching them how to build a brand is not easy. And as educators, it's great for you to revisit, for teachers to revisit, administrative people to revisit, what is your personal brand? If I'm a physics teacher, what do I want to be known for, right? Is it just knowledge base, or is it an ability to relate to students' questions? We all have teachers that we love going to class with, right? More than others. Think about what their personal brand was. Like, why was it that you liked, Mr. Mrs. Smith, or, whatever it is, more than this other teacher, right? And you begin to get a sense for, oh, okay, they're branded that way. That's why in some sense I consume them as a teacher. I buy certain kind of flavors of cornflakes because I like that brand, like that, what it represents. But that's what students need to have is, I'm a distinct person on myself and my branding is X. So that's why I have the qualifications for a company or organization to hire me. And the last thing I would say is, for educators, is career designing. So empowering students to design flexible, personalized career journeys. So when I work with my clients, often I'll say, if the job description is X, right, what you owe the company is sort of X plus one, or it's a new job completely. It's a Y. What I mean by that is the most powerful employee is someone who can not just think out of the box, quote unquote, creatively, but someone who can push everything forward, who defines a new role, says that, you wanted to have someone with these skill sets. Actually, I think that in this new world, you're going to need someone with these skill sets, other skill sets. And so designing is all about being part of that innovative process, right? To develop that new team that's needed to succeed. So based on personalized career journeys that align with their passions, skills, and evolving demands of the future, right? So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what it means to have a collaborative effort between educators and family and caregivers, because um, more than ever, it's going to be needed that collaboration to support our students. And both parties bring very different attributes to the table, right? That are both needed to really help our students succeed. And yeah, so that's kind of my experiences in the field of, executive coaching, but brought down to a little bit more to the future of work for a lot of students as well. So, all right, so that's kind of the presentation that I have. Curious about any questions or things that I've missed, or what have you thought about? So I'll just take a couple of the questions here. Oh, I love these. Thank you. Um, we are all multitasking as parents. Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. If I think about all the numbers that I put down there, the future of our role, right? Um, think about all that plus our day job, right? Plus the work that we have to do, like caring for our parents, right? Caring for um, our friends, or even our own careers. They're shifting. And I think that's the challenge where we need to be supportive of each other. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the reason why I'm speaking with like a 55, 60-year-old person, 50 plus person who's been working for a while is because it's very difficult to balance developing your career with supporting your kids, your students, or whatever it is, and enabling them to be able to know how to navigate through a world that you're just learning how to navigate, right? So we'll do our best, right? I agree that straight pathway was what because yeah, straight pathway, right? And if being Asian, when my parents kind of introduced me to their friends, I mean, they wanted to have something to latch on to, like my son is a, famous whatever it is, and they would, fill in the blank with that profession, right? But if you can get there soon, rather than kind of go around, like that's even better, right? Straight pathway to there is exactly it. Um, what are questions we should ask our student to help them discover their first paid work? That's a very, very good question. I always start with impact. I always start with where do you think that you're most passionate about as far as bettering the life of someone else, right? And who is that someone else? So, and it doesn't have to be a very lofty answer, but if you think back about your career, right? If you decided to do teaching, if you decided to do the business, your ultimate stakeholder, the person that you were trying to impact was, if you're a teacher, it's students, right? Getting them jobs. And that itself, where you want to impact is a lot easier than saying, where do you want to work? Because we work for an outcome, we work for a purpose, right? If you define that purpose first, then you can think about, well, what's the options of jobs that you might want to do, right? So I always give the example of if you want to be now moving from an engineer to building up teams, your fundamental question is how do I impact that team? And a large part of that is education, right? Just training, helping them to be able to develop these new skills. But if you tell me that your goal is to impact students, right? People who learn, you could do that as a high school teacher. Or you could also do that as a corporate trainer, right? Any of you who've given training before, it's like teaching a class. So I think the question really is around knowing what you know about yourself, your strengths as you are today, what people have told you, who do you want to impact? Who do you want to give to, right? It is about giving first before taking. And in giving, you actually get a lot. And then you sit down and explore with them, like what markets, what areas out there really have a need for what you want to do as an impact. Now, be aware that this is going to change over time, right? Think about your career, what you wanted to do, your goals, the impact you have shifted all around the, spectrum, right? As time has progressed. So that's okay. But the question is, let's start somewhere. Let's start about where you want to make an impact the most, and then what's the next role, the first job that you want to take on that gets you on that path. Um, I just want to say that it may be completely wrong, your guidance might be completely off in their conclusion, but I think um, I think community does reward effort. I think that what I've seen before is that it's better to kind of get going and be wrong than to not going at all. Just static there, paralyzed. Just start doing something, right? And hopefully that helps there. And yeah, Felicia, if you have any, if that makes sense to you or any other thoughts, that'd be great to hear that. Um, Would it be useful for students to start building their brand on LinkedIn? Yes. Yes, absolutely. You can never start earlier. And the other thing is, keep in mind that to remind our students that social media, we know this, once something is out there, you can't take it back. So in my organization that I support, there's a software called, sorry, a service called Mints, the Mints Group. What they do is a social media audit of somebody. So if I'm applying for a job, one of their background checks is going to be to do a social media scrape to know, okay, I don't want to take on a risk or liability. Has Simeon ever said anything or written anything or drawn anything or that is kind of remotely a little bit questionable as far as like maybe it's too hard of a political stance, maybe like too sexual and whatever it is. That whole branding of itself is not just LinkedIn. That's important. LinkedIn is a big part of my work, by the way. I write and optimize LinkedIn for executives, right? That's just what I do. But beyond that, there's also the idea of how do you use, I don't know, if you're a little bit older and you come to a Facebook, right? That's like for older people, but even Instagram. So, I've thought a lot about whether I want to cater towards people on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter or X. But my particular market is not there, right? But for our kids, they're just starting out. Like I said, it's better to start moving in the wrong direction than not to move at all. So start building a brand is absolutely important even now. You can use LinkedIn. The problem is that, well, the challenge is that not many people are going to visit your profile because you don't have a lot to offer and the keywords that companies look for are not going to hit your, but that's okay because like I said, you're constantly evolving and adapting, and the way that you present yourself needs to change like that too, right? Um, what social media platforms they should use is entirely up to them. I would just say be very careful about what you post, because when employers do look for you, sometimes they do social scraping, especially when it's very senior jobs or they're in positions of authority or like managers. They want to know whether you're a liability to them. And um, we should all be careful too, right? Just to be aware of that, because many of us are going to be looking for work and we're still in our careers, right? Um, and when should they start? I mean, immediately. Like, however they present themselves to their friends begins to build their brand. If they're the class joker, um, that's a brand, right? That's a brand. Because if someone asks you, like, who's the class joker, class clown in your class, you could name them. So it's like, when they're not in the room, right? Branding is all about what people say about you when you're not in the room. It starts now. So help them to see that and let them be children, but at the same time know that they're preparing themselves for something ahead that's not entirely going to be very clear all the time, right? All right. Yes, yeah, the background check is very, very interesting. You can check it out. It's the Mints. So MINT Mint and then add a Z to it. And they're very, very thorough. They find a way to be able to identify articles, comments that you made in the background. Maybe not all of it, but they don't do the work of scraping that or getting it off. It's very difficult to rub off stuff off the internet, right? As you may know. Um, do you suggest students follow LinkedIn profiles of people? Yeah, yeah, that's a hardcore yes, for sure. That goes back to the comment I made earlier about curiosity, right? So yes, curiosity killed the cat, but at the same time, curiosity also built Rome, right? It built Rome. People were curious about how do you build a sustainable city, and because of that, then they started looking for the answers and they started to like curiosity built Rome. So that's what it is you have to start looking for inspirational figures, right? One of the things that I love doing when I'm reading someone's autobiography or reading their profile is what I'm trying to do is collect how can I relate to this person, right? When I see that they've done these things, it's like, oh, that's what I've always wanted to do. So now you have an example in real life where you can follow their footsteps or study what it is that they did in order to get to where they went to, right? So absolutely follow people, follow community groups, conversation groups, discussion groups, sorry. Um, and LinkedIn is very, it's a big person's tool, right? So it's not entirely unlike Facebook, for example, but the audience, you got to be very careful, is very different. I when I post on LinkedIn, and it'd be great if we connect on LinkedIn. So I'll give you my name again, if you have that. But I'm very aware that if I put a link out there or a post out there that's more about like, the how-tos, how do you write a really effective resume, right? Or how do you survive this massive round of layoffs, right? What's emotional support that you need from your family in order to get through? Like these are they're very kind of cutting the heart topics that still mean a lot to people, a lot more so than writing posts about like how do you give a good interview, even though that's very important. But the number of impressions that I get from, my biggest post ever had about 30,000 views, and it was literally, I kid you not, I posted my termination form. I was laid off like years ago, and I kept the termination sheet, like, it's great to have you, but you're not a fit. I posted that on LinkedIn because I was trying to talk about like learning your lessons, and that just exploded, and I had no idea that that would do that. I just thought that it would be fun to do that, to post it out there. But then you follow up with like, okay, careers in the digital age, here's like, and no one cares about that. So that makes me think a lot about like, how are people learning about stuff, and, are they, what is their incentive? So LinkedIn has got a wide audience. Again, following people and obviously discussion groups is very important. One last thing I would say is that when you talk to your student, remind them that everything they're doing is absorbing something. Every time they do something, they're absorbing some sort of piece of information. So the more that you read about and the more that you're inspired, the more your arsenal will be when you go to interview, or when you're at a networking event, or you're encouraging them to go to like some sort of job fair, right? You're equipping them with the weapons to be able to go out and really make an impact, right? And be memorable to people who are there, who are more likely to call you up for a job, right, than others. All right. Any other questions? This is a really, I love this topic. The partnership between educators and parents, your guardians, is going to be so critical. Otherwise, if not, thank you for joining. I really appreciate your time. And, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My name is Simeon Wong. If you're on LinkedIn, love to connect with you. Just look me up, and we can do that. All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good day, guys. Talk to you soon.